In the vast expanse of the multiverse, where infinite Earths collide and countless versions of reality intertwine, there exists a legend whispered in the darkest corners of military academies across dimensions. It speaks of a soldier, unlike any other, a Marine who adopted the ways of the Old West, blending frontier justice with modern warfare in ways that defy comprehension. They called him the Cowboy Marine of One Earth, and his kill count became the subject of a controversial study that would shake the foundations of military science itself. When researchers finally calculated the numbers, when they traced every bullet, every standoff, every impossible mission across timelines, what they discovered wasn't just a statistic. It was a phenomenon that challenged everything the Academy thought. They knew about combat, mortality, and the human capacity for survival. The answer they found was so staggering, so utterly unprecedented, that it left scholars speechless, commanders in disbelief, and historians scrambling to rewrite the chronicles of warfare. This is his story, the legend behind the numbers that nobody believed could be real. The tale begins on One Earth, a reality where the American frontier never truly ended, but instead evolved, merging with modern military technology in unexpected ways. In the sprawling desert training grounds of Fort Coronado, a young recruit named Jackson "Jax" Reeves stood out from his fellow Marines not for his size or strength, but for his peculiar philosophy of combat. While others studied tactical manuals and computer simulations, Jax spent his nights reading historical accounts of legendary gunslingers Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Billy the Kidman, who lived and died by codes of honor written in gunpowder and blood. His drill instructors dismissed him as a romantic fool at first, this tall, lean recruit with storm gray eyes who insisted on practicing quick-draw techniques with his sidearm during downtime. But everything changed during a live-fire exercise in the scorching Arizona Badlands. His unit encountered an unexpected ambush from opposition forces during what should have been a routine training scenario. While seasoned Marines dove for cover, shouting coordinates and calling for support, Jax moved like a phantom from the past. His movements were fluid, almost casual, as he drew his weapon with a speed that seemed to bend the laws of physics. 3 shots, 3 targets neutralized. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 seconds. The commanding officer, Colonel Marcus Hendricks, a 30-year veteran with 2 tours in 3 different conflict zones, stood frozen in disbelief as he watched the camera footage afterward. This wasn't standard military training. This was something else entirely, something primal and precise that belonged to another era, yet somehow proved devastatingly effective in modern combat. Hendricks called Jax into his office that evening, the young Marine standing at attention before the weathered colonel's desk. "Where did you learn to shoot like that, son?" Hendricks asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and concern. Jax's answer was simple and unwavering. "My grandfather raised me on stories of the Old West, sir. He taught me that technology changes, but the fundamentals of facing down danger, those never change. Speed, accuracy, and the will to survive. That's all any gunfighter ever needed." Hendricks saw something in that moment, a potential that could either revolutionize combat doctrine or get this unconventional Marine killed in the field. He made a decision that would ripple through military history. Rather than forcing Jax to conform to standard protocols, he created a special operations unit around him, one that would allow this Cowboy Marine to fight his way fast, instinctive, and lethal. They called it Unit Sagebrush, and Jax Reeves became its first and most deadly operative. The Academy's statisticians began tracking his missions with clinical precision, documenting every engagement, every confirmed elimination, never suspecting that the numbers they were collecting would one day become the subject of the most controversial military study ever conducted. Within 6 months, Jax had completed 12 missions across hostile territories that spanned from urban warfare zones to mountain insurgencies. His unconventional methods treating modern combat scenarios like Old West showdowns, reading opponents like poker players, reading tells moving through battle spaces with the confidence of a sheriff walking down a dusty street at high noon produced results that defied conventional military wisdom. His survival rate was 100%. His mission success rate was absolute. And his kill count was climbing at a pace that made even hardened commanders uncomfortable. The legend of the Cowboy Marine was born, but the truth behind his effectiveness remained a mystery that the Academy was only beginning to unravel. As Jax Reeves and Unit Sagebrush deployed across increasingly dangerous theaters of operation, the nature of his assignments evolved from standard reconnaissance to the impossible missions that other Special Forces units had failed to complete. The Academy's research division, led by Dr. Evelyn Chun, a behavioral psychologist specializing in combat effectiveness, began noticing patterns in Jax's operational reports that contradicted every established model of warfare psychology. Most elite soldiers showed increased stress markers and decreased decision-making efficiency in high-casualty scenarios. Jax showed the opposite. He became calmer, more focused, more effective as the danger intensified. Mission 17 took Unit Sagebrush into the urban nightmare of Sector 9, a collapsed city-state where 3 rival factions had turned the ruins into a maze of death traps and ambush points. Intelligence indicated that a high-value target, a weapons dealer, supplying all 3 factions, operated from somewhere deep in the Sector's heart. 4 previous teams had entered. None had returned. Command gave Jax 48 hours to extract the target or confirm termination. He walked into Sector 9 alone, carrying only his customized sidearm, a rifle, and the attitude of a marshal entering a lawless frontier town. The after-action report would later describe what happened as statistically impossible. Jax navigated 13 separate ambushes, neutralized 37 hostiles, rescued 2 members from a previous failed extraction team who had been held prisoner, and brought the target out alive for interrogation. When asked how he survived against such overwhelming odds, Jax simply replied, "I treated every corner like a saloon door, every rooftop sniper like a bushwhacker, and every engagement like a duel. In the Old West, you survived by being faster and smarter, not by having more guns." That hasn't changed. Dr. Chun's team became obsessed with understanding the psychological mechanisms that allowed Jax to function at this level. They subjected him to cognitive tests, neural imaging, stress response evaluations, everything that might explain his superhuman combat effectiveness. What they discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about human performance under extreme conditions. Jax's brain activity during simulated combat scenarios showed unusual synchronization between his limbic system and prefrontal cortex. Essentially, his emotional responses and rational decision-making weren't competing for cognitive resources as they did in normal individuals. They were working in perfect harmony, allowing him to process threats and respond with simultaneously instinctive and calculated precision. The missions continued, each one pushing the boundaries of what seemed possible. Mission 23 involved infiltrating a mountain fortress where an insurgent leader commanded a force of over 200 fighters. Standard military doctrine called for air support, artillery bombardment, and a full company of soldiers. Jax went in with a 4-man team, moving through the complex like smoke, eliminating sentries with the quiet efficiency of a gunslinger in the night. The engagement lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the insurgent leader was neutralized along with 43 of his top lieutenants, and the fortress was in flames. Jax and his team extracted without casualties. The kill count that Dr. Chun's team was compiling grew more staggering with each mission. But it was in Mission 28 that the true scope of Jax's capabilities would become apparent. Intelligence identified a terrorist cell planning a multi-site attack that would kill thousands of civilians. The cell operated from a compound in hostile territory, protected by elite guards and sophisticated security systems. Time was critical. The attack was scheduled in 72 hours. Jax insisted on a solo infiltration, arguing that a larger force would be detected before achieving the objective. Command reluctantly agreed, and what happened next would become the stuff of legend. Jax spent 56 hours inside enemy territory, methodically dismantling the terrorist operation piece by piece. He neutralized 62 hostiles, disabled 3 vehicle-borne explosives, and recovered intelligence that led to the disruption of 7 related cells across 4 countries. When he finally emerged from the compound and reached the extraction point, he had been awake for more than 60 hours straight, had sustained 3 non-critical injuries, and had consumed nothing but water and field rations. Dr. Chun reviewed the mission, footage and biometric data with growing disbelief. No human should have been capable of maintaining that level of performance under such conditions. Yet Jax had done it, and he had done it by applying frontier survival instincts to modern warfare, treating the mission like a long ride through hostile territory where vigilance, resourcefulness, and an unwavering will to survive were the only things standing between life and death. The whispers began in the halls of the Military Science Academy after Mission 35, when Jax's cumulative kill count exceeded 300 confirmed hostile eliminations in less than 80 months of active deployment. Dr. Evelyn Chun presented her preliminary findings to a closed session of the Academy's Research Council, and the room erupted in skepticism. "These numbers are impossible," declared General Raymond Walsh, a board member with 4 decades of military experience. "Either your data is flawed or someone is manipulating the reports." Dr. Chun stood her ground, displaying satellite footage, drone recordings, and biometric data that corroborated every engagement. "The data is accurate, General. What we're witnessing is a paradigm shift in individual combat effectiveness that our models never anticipated." The Academy formed a special investigative committee to audit every aspect of Jax's service record. They interviewed his commanding officers, his team members, even the support personnel who maintained his equipment. What emerged was a portrait of a soldier who existed in a category beyond standard classification. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, who had served 3 missions with Jax, described an encounter that exemplified his unusual approach to combat. "We were pinned down in a village, taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Standard procedure was to call for air support and wait for extraction. Jax just stood up, walked into the center of the street, completely exposed, and started eliminating targets one by one like he was shooting bottles off a fence. He wasn't reckless. It was the opposite. He knew exactly where every hostile was positioned, had calculated the angles, and was giving them targets they couldn't hit because he was moving in ways they didn't anticipate. It was like watching someone from the 1800s step into our century and show us that we'd forgotten something essential about combat, that confidence and skill can be more powerful than cover and caution. The committee's investigation expanded beyond Jax's missions to examine the broader implications of his combat philosophy. They discovered that his methods were beginning to influence other special operations units, with soldiers attempting to incorporate elements of his gunslinger approach into their own tactics. Some succeeded, showing modest improvements in reaction times and target acquisition. Others failed catastrophically, lacking the innate instincts and years of specialized training that made Jax's approach effective. The Academy realized they were observing not just an exceptional individual, but potentially a fundamental re-examination of how modern warfare could be conducted. Then came the discovery that would transform the investigation from academic curiosity into urgent priority. Dr. Chun's team, while conducting a routine audit of historical military records to establish comparative benchmarks, stumbled upon something extraordinary. Buried in classified archives from World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam, and every major conflict since, they found references to soldiers described in remarkably similar terms, lone operators with unconventional methods. extraordinary kill counts, and philosophical approaches to combat that drew from older, more primal traditions of warfare. The documentation was fragmentary and often suppressed, but a pattern emerged. In every generation, in every major conflict, there appeared to be individuals who transcended standard military doctrine and achieved results that seemed superhuman. The most shocking revelation came when Dr. Chun traced Jax's lineage. His grandfather, whom he had credited with teaching him the ways of the Old West, had been one of these legendary soldiers, a Marine in Vietnam with a confirmed kill count that rivaled Jax's own, though the records had been classified for reasons the current documentation didn't explain. Further investigation revealed that the family line included frontier lawmen, gunfighters, and military scouts stretching back to the American Civil War. It appeared that what Jax possessed wasn't just training or philosophy. It might be something inherited, something passed down through generations of individuals who survived by being faster, smarter, and more attuned to the rhythms of life and death combat than their contemporaries. The Academy's investigation shifted focus. They were no longer just studying Jax Reeves. They were attempting to understand whether his abilities represented a replicable skill set or something more profound, possibly even genetic. The implications were staggering. If Jax's capabilities could be understood and taught, it could revolutionize military training worldwide. If they couldn't, if his effectiveness was truly unique and unteachable, then the Academy was simply documenting the career of a singular phenomenon, the last of a dying breed of warrior that the modern world had thought was extinct. The committee prepared for the most comprehensive study of combat effectiveness ever undertaken, unaware that the answer they would eventually find would challenge not just military doctrine, but fundamental assumptions about human evolution and survival. 6 months into their investigation, Dr. Chen's team had compiled a data set that would become the most analyzed document in modern military science. Jax Reeves had completed 57 missions. His confirmed kill count stood at 483 hostile combatants, 0 civilian casualties, 0 friendly fire incidents. Mission success rate, 100%. Personal injury count, 12 non-critical wounds, all of which he treated himself in the field. The statistical probability of this performance record, according to the Academy's combat modeling algorithms, was approximately 1 in 17 billion, essentially impossible within the framework of conventional understanding. But numbers alone couldn't explain what made Jax effective. Dr. Chun knew they needed to understand the cognitive and psychological mechanisms that allowed him to function at this level. She arranged for an unprecedented experiment. Jax would participate in a full neural mapping procedure while undergoing combat simulation, allowing researchers to observe his brain activity in real time during engagement scenarios. What they witnessed during that session would fundamentally alter military psychology as a discipline. As the simulation began, presenting Jax with a complex urban warfare scenario involving multiple hostiles and civilian non-combatants, his neural patterns showed immediate and dramatic changes. Most soldiers experienced heightened activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, accompanied by increased stress hormones and scattered attention across multiple threat vectors. Jax's amygdala activity actually decreased, while areas associated with spatial awareness, pattern recognition, and motor control showed extraordinary synchronization. It's like watching a chess grandmaster evaluate a board, Dr. Chan explained to the research committee, except the evaluation is happening in milliseconds, and the stakes are life and death. His brain isn't processing threats sequentially like most soldiers do. He's perceiving the entire combat space as a unified whole, identifying patterns and opportunities that wouldn't be apparent to normal cognitive processing. But there was something else. Something that appeared in the neural data that Dr. Chun initially dismissed as sensor error. During peak combat moments in the simulation, Jax's brain showed activity in regions associated with temporal perception. Essentially, His subjective experience of time appeared to be different from normal human consciousness. He was experiencing combat situations in slow motion, giving him what amounted to additional processing time for decisions that other soldiers had to make in fractions of a second. The Academy's investigation expanded to include genetic analysis, and here the mystery deepened. Jax's DNA showed unusual markers in genes associated with reaction time, visual processing, and stress response regulation. But these markers weren't unique to him. They appeared in his family line, suggesting a hereditary component that had been selected through generations of survival in high-threat environments. It was evolutionary adaptation in action, preserved and refined through family traditions, that had kept these skills alive even as the frontier disappeared and modern civilization emerged. The gunslinger philosophy wasn't just a romantic affectation. It was a survival strategy that worked because it aligned with inherited neurological capabilities that made certain individuals naturally suited for life-and-death combat. The Academy's committee met in emergency session to discuss the implications. If Jax's abilities were primarily genetic rather than trained, it meant that attempting to replicate his methods in normal soldiers might be futile or even dangerous. But if the genetic factors only provided potential that still required the right training and philosophical approach to activate, then there might be a pathway to identifying and developing other individuals with similar capabilities. The military applications were obvious and troubling. A program to identify and train Cowboy Marines could create an elite force of unprecedented effectiveness. But it would also raise profound ethical questions about genetic selection and the militarization of inherited traits. General Walsh, who had initially been the most skeptical member of the committee, found himself grappling with implications he never anticipated. "I've spent my entire career believing that modern warfare was about technology, coordination, and superior firepower," he admitted during one heated session. "What you're showing me suggests that there is still a place, maybe even a crucial place for the individual warrior who operates outside our conventional doctrines. And that terrifies me because if we're wrong about this, if combat effectiveness can really come down to genetic inheritance and frontier philosophy, then everything we teach at our military academies might be preparing soldiers for the wrong kind of war." The committee authorized the next phase of investigation: comprehensive battlefield monitoring during actual combat operations. They needed to see if Jax's abilities held up, not just in simulations or controlled environments, but in the chaos of real warfare where unpredictability and chance could overwhelm even the most capable soldier. Mission 63 would provide that test, and the results would leave the entire Academy speechless. Mission 63 began as a straightforward hostage rescue operation, but intelligence failures and rapidly changing battlefield conditions transformed it into the most demanding test of Jax's abilities that anyone could have designed. A diplomatic convoy had been ambushed in the border region between hostile territories, and 6 personnel, including 2 ambassadors, were being held in a fortified compound by a militant group with sophisticated training and equipment. Standard extraction protocol called for a full tactical team, but the militants had made clear that any large-scale military response would result in immediate execution of the hostages. Command made the unprecedented decision to send Jax in alone, with Dr. Chen's team monitoring everything through satellite feeds, drone coverage, and the biometric sensors Jax wore for the Academy study. As Jax approached the compound in darkness, moving across 2 miles of rough terrain with the patience of a scout tracking prey through hostile wilderness, the research team watched his vital signs with growing amazement. His heart rate remained steady at 60 beats per minute, resting rate for most people. His breathing was deep and regular. Every biometric indicator suggested he was completely calm, despite moving toward a situation where he would be outnumbered approximately 40-1. Dr. Chen recognized what she was seeing. This was the gunslinger mentality in its purest form. The absolute confidence that comes from knowing your capabilities and accepting whatever outcome fate might bring. Fear didn't control him because he had made peace with mortality long before entering the battlefield. The compound was a 3-story structure surrounded by guard towers and patrolled perimeters. A tactical nightmare that would challenge an entire special operations team. Jack studied it for 30 minutes, mapping patterns in the guard rotations, identifying sightlines and blind spots, reading the compound like a tracker reads signs in the wilderness. Then he moved. And what happened next would be analyzed frame by frame for years by military strategists trying to understand how one man accomplished what seemed impossible. He eliminated the perimeter guards in silence, moving from position to position with the economy of motion that characterized all his combat actions. No wasted movement, no unnecessary risk, every action serving multiple purposes. By the time he reached the main building, he had neutralized 12 hostiles, and no alarm had been raised. Inside the compound, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Jacques located the hostages in a third-floor room, but his entry had finally been detected. The militants converged on his position from multiple directions, and for the first time in his career, Jacques found himself in a scenario where extraction without engagement was impossible. What followed was 3 minutes and 40 seconds of combat that Dr. Chun would later describe as the most extraordinary display of individual martial capability ever documented in modern warfare. Jacques moved through the building like a storm, engaging hostiles in a continuous flowing sequence that seemed choreographed but was entirely improvised. He used environmental elements, doorways, corners, elevation changes, exactly as a frontier gunfighter would use the architecture of a frontier town, creating situations where his opponents couldn't bring their numerical advantage to bear. The drone footage showed moments that seemed to violate the laws of physics, Jacques sliding under hostile fire, pivoting to engage targets behind him without breaking stride, reloading weapons while moving at full speed through darkened corridors. His kill count during those 3 minutes was 21 confirmed eliminations, with 7 additional hostile combatants neutralized through non-lethal means when they posed no direct threat to the hostages. He reached the hostage room, secured the 6 personnel, and executed an extraction through a route he had identified during his initial reconnaissance. Service stairway that most tactical planners would have considered too exposed to be viable. But Jacques understood something that conventional tactics often missed. In close quarters combat, speed and aggression could create their own protection by keeping opponents reactive instead of proactive. The extraction succeeded. All 6 hostages returned safely. Jacques sustained 2 minor injuries, a grazing wound from a ricochet and bruised ribs from a close quarters engagement. His post-mission debrief was characteristically brief. It was like clearing out a rustler's hideout. Structure's the same whether it's a frontier cabin or a modern compound. You use the terrain, you control the angles, and you never let them dictate the tempo of the fight. But for Dr. Chun and the Academy's committee, what mattered were the numbers that no one could dispute. Jacques had achieved a successful hostage rescue in a scenario where computer models gave a solo operator a statistical survival probability of less than 3%. His kill count had exceeded 500 confirmed hostile eliminations across 63 missions. And he had done it by applying combat philosophy that was a century and a half old to modern warfare situations, proving that some truths about survival and combat transcend technological advancement. 8 months after the investigation began, Dr. Evelyn Chen stood before a packed auditorium at the Military Science Academy, preparing to present findings that would fundamentally challenge conventional military doctrine. The audience included top commanders from multiple branches of service, defense analysts, military historians, and psychology researchers from institutions around the world. What Dr. Chun was about to reveal wasn't just data about one exceptional soldier. It was a comprehensive reassessment of human combat capability that suggested military science had overlooked something essential about the nature of warfare itself. The question we were asked to answer, Dr. Chum began, was simple on its surface. What is the kill count of the one Earth Cowboy Marine, and how did he achieve it? But answering that question required us to confront uncomfortable truths about our assumptions, our training methods, and our understanding of what makes a soldier effective. She displayed the final statistics. 67 missions completed over 20 months. 538 confirmed hostile eliminations. 0 civilian casualties. 0 mission failures. 100% survival rate for both the operator and protected personnel under his care. These numbers, by themselves, are unprecedented in modern military history. But numbers alone don't explain the phenomenon we've been studying. Dr. Chun presented the neurological findings, the genetic analysis, the psychological profiles, all the scientific data that attempted to quantify and explain Jax Reeves' extraordinary capabilities. But then she addressed the question that hung unspoken in the auditorium. Could his methods be taught? Could the military create more soldiers like him? Her answer was both hopeful and sobering. We've identified genetic markers that correlate with enhanced combat capability, yes. We've documented neurological patterns that allow for superior threat assessment and response. But what we've learned is that genetics provides potential. It doesn't guarantee results. Jax Reeves is effective not just because of inherited traits, but because those traits were cultivated through a specific philosophical approach to combat that most modern military training actively discourages. The gunslinger philosophy, Dr. Chen explained, was fundamentally incompatible with conventional military doctrine in key ways. Modern training emphasized teamwork, following orders, adherence to protocols, and risk mitigation through technological superiority. The cowboy approach emphasized individual judgment, instinctive action, acceptance of risk, and trust in personal skill over technological advantages. Both philosophies had value, but they optimized for different types of combat. What we've discovered, Dr. Chung continued, is that modern warfare has become so focused on reducing individual risk and maximizing technological advantage that we've inadvertently selected against the very traits that made historical warriors like frontier gunslingers so effective. We've been training soldiers to be components in a larger system, when combat situations often demand individuals who can operate as complete systems unto themselves. The implications send ripples through the military establishment. General Walsh, who had authorized the investigation with deep skepticism, stood to address the assembly. Dr. Chun's findings force us to confront a difficult question. Have we been preparing our soldiers for the wars we want to fight, or the wars we actually face? The answer disturbs me, because I believe we've been doing the former while Private Reeves, Sergeant Reeves now has been demonstrating the effectiveness of the latter. The Academy's official recommendation was measured but revolutionary. They couldn't and shouldn't attempt to transform the entire military into gunslinger Marines. The conventional approach to warfare remained essential for most operations. But there was now scientific validation for creating specialized units that selected for and cultivated the psychological and cognitive traits that made operators like Jax effective. These units would operate outside normal chains of command, with mission parameters instead of strict operational orders, in situations where technological advantages were limited and individual capability was paramount. The final revelation came when Dr. Chun addressed the question everyone wanted answered, but few dared ask. What was special about One Earth that produced a soldier like Jax Reeves? Her answer was profound in its simplicity. Nothing and everything. One Earth isn't unique in its capacity to produce exceptional warriors. History shows us that every generation, every culture, every military force has individuals who transcend normal capability. What's unique is that on One Earth, we recognized and studied this phenomenon instead of simply utilizing it and moving on. We asked the uncomfortable questions. We challenged our assumptions. And in doing so, we discovered that the most advanced combat effectiveness might come not from the newest technology or tactics, but from understanding and applying the oldest principles of survival that have kept warriors alive since humans first faced life and death conflict. The auditorium fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled military leadership. The answer to what made the Cowboy Marines so effective wasn't a secret technique or advanced training program. It was a fundamental philosophy about combat, survival, and human capability that modern warfare had almost forgotten. Jacques Reeves had simply remembered what frontier gunslingers always knew. In a life-or-death situation, technology matters less than skill, numbers matter less than speed, and planning matters less than the ability to adapt and act with absolute commitment in the moment of crisis. His kill count wasn't just a statistic. It was evidence that some truths about warfare transcend time, technology, and tactical doctrine. And that truth left the Academy speechless, not because it was complicated or revolutionary, but because it was so simple that everyone had overlooked it. Sometimes, the old ways work because they rebuilt on something more fundamental than doctrine. They rebuilt on the raw human capacity for survival when everything else falls away and all that remains is skill, will, and the courage to face death standing up.